Good afternoon and welcome to Oxwide. Today we've got a bit of a special edition where we're talking about the work we've been doing over the past 12 months around building a Fairer Oxleas. It was a year ago tomorrow, the 8th of June 2020, that I wrote to you all following the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and a number of other incidents that had really, during the early days of the pandemic, brought some of our concerns about inequality to a head, and particularly racial inequality and the harm that was resulting from that. What we've seen over the last 15, 16 months or so now is that inequality and discrimination and lack of fairness and opportunity causes harm, and that people from ethnic minority backgrounds have been twice as likely to die from COVID, more exposed to the effects of this pandemic, and in a way that we've never really seen before. I think certainly not in my lifetime. We've been presented with some very clear evidence that discrimination and injustice in the way that people are treated depending on their ethnicity just isn't ethically and morally wrong, but it can cause real deep lasting harm to communities. And so as a result, when I wrote to you last year, I said it's not just enough for us to say that these things matter and that these things need to be addressed within the NHS and within Oxleas, but also that we do some things about them. And I asked you to judge us on what we as a trust were able to do over the course of the next year or so. And I said we'd come back to you regularly as well and talk to you about what we've been doing and what we've been trying to change. And so this is the sort of first anniversary of that, and a first opportunity really for me and a number of colleagues from across the organisation over the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, to talk about what we're doing. I'm also delighted to be joined as well by guest Alison Smith, who works for NHS England on a London basis as well, to look at our workforce race programme as well. And Alison and I will be having a conversation about some of the work that we're doing regionally as well as within Oxleas to try to improve the experience of colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds working within the service. So in terms of the first 12 months, I did say, judge us by what we do, not just by what we say. And you might have noticed if your PC has gone into sleep mode in the last couple of days that we've been changing our screensavers and others to put up some information about some of the kind of changes we've been trying to make. We set up a Building a Fairer Oxleas working group in the early days of this programme of work, bringing together staff with a range of experiences from across the organisation. And what you told us was that you really wanted us to focus in the first instance on fairness around recruitment and how we were going about creating opportunity within Oxleas from people from a range of different backgrounds to proceed within the organisation. And as a result, we've made a number of changes that have helped us increase representation from ethnic minority backgrounds within our board, within our executive team, and in those all-important Band 8 jobs as well. So we're now in a position where a third of our board, a third of our exec and shadow exec are now from ethnic minority backgrounds, which puts us at the forefront of trusts in London and nationally. And we've also seen an improvement from 25 to 27% of our staff in the Band 8 roles coming from an ethnic minority background. We've introduced a ban now on all-white interview panels and recruitment processes that are driven entirely by white senior staff to try to help us address the opportunity for bias and recruiting like for like within some of our senior roles, and also launched our Breaking the Band 7 Ceiling programme. Azra Mukhtar, our Director of Finance, gave the first talk of that a couple of weeks ago, and tomorrow Janine LaRosa from NHS England will be speaking about her experiences in breaking through that Band 7 ceiling, and this is very much a programme of work we want to continue over the next 12 months. We've also trained many senior staff, both at exec and board level, but also now increasingly within our service directorates, about cultural intelligence and how people like me can better understand how we can support and work with our ethnic minority background colleagues to support them in their work aspirations, and also to be sensitive to the things in the workplace that we just don't figure out, the things that we don't pick up because we are never subjected to that same level of discrimination and prejudice. And so there's been a range of things happening, and you can read more on the Ox about some of the initiatives we've been taking to try to crack into this. We've also changed the trust values as well. You'll be aware of this, that we've got a new set of values for Oxleas that have been based heavily on conversations with you and the staff. And really, I suppose my main observation over the last 12, 15 months is that although COVID's been a very powerful experience personally and professionally for me, and I know for many of you, I think some of the most powerful conversations I've had in the last year and a half have been with those of you who've come forward to speak about your experiences of working in the NHS when you come from an ethnic minority background, or what it's like to be a woman in a senior role in the NHS, or what it's like to be someone who's not been able to be open about their sexuality or gender in the workplace because of discrimination, and also with a number of colleagues to talk about those of us with a lived experience of mental ill health as well, and what that means, and some of those stories that have been brought to a head as a result of the pressures of the pandemic. They've been simmering for decades, for years, and for many of you throughout your lives. And lots of the work that we've managed to do in the last year has been as a result of you coming forward. And it's not just having the courage, to be honest, it's having the patience to sit down and talk to us again about things that you've been saying year in, year out for a very long period of time. But I hope that you can see that there are signs now that we really are trying to create structural change within this organisation. And I hope you'll hear, as I talk to Alison a bit later on, that we're trying across the NHS to make some of this structural change take root on a broader footprint. So coming up in today's programme, we've got a couple of pieces that we'll hear from. We've got a couple of colleagues who've been part of the Building a Fairer Oxleas working group. We'll talk about how they've put those priorities together for us and their impression of how the first year's gone. I'll be talking to Alison Smith about the work we're doing regionally to try to tackle inequalities and building a fairer NHS, not just a fairer Oxleas. We'll also hear from our BAMEX network, from Juliana and colleagues about the work they're doing to support you as part of that very active network. And also a couple of interviews around diversity space that Hassan's going to carry out for us, just to let us hear a bit more about the work that we've been doing there to support conversations around diversity within Oxleas. And then Rachel Clare Evans, who along with our team and workforce have been a real powerhouse behind this over the last 12 months to talk about what we do in terms of our next steps. So first off though, I'm going to hand over to a short animation about Building a Fairer Oxleas, and then we'll hear from Hassan, Karen and colleagues about the Building a Fairer Oxleas working group. Thank you.
Building a Fairer Oxleas is a programme of work involving frontline staff, senior managers and board members in making positive changes to how it feels to work at Oxleas.
Over the past 12 months, we've been making changes to build a fairer Oxleas. Here's what we've done so far.
36% of the strategic executive team are Black, Asian or minority ethnic people. All the executive team members are trained in cultural intelligence and inclusive leadership.
New values and behaviours focus on fairness and inclusion. We're fair.
42 BAFO volunteers in the action plan group and growing.
500 managers to be trained about race.
89 Just Culture panels in 2020-2021.
40% reduction in violence and aggression on key wards.
15 online wellbeing sessions hosted by senior leaders for Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff.
6 speakers booked for the Breaking the Band 7 Ceiling speaker programme.
50 Greenwich managers trained on cultural intelligence.
A film about microaggressions and micro-kindnesses titled In Each Other's Shoes.
2% increase in the number of Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff at bands 8A, B and C, now at 27%.
All interview panels to include Black, Asian or minority ethnic panellists.
33% of the board are Black, Asian or minority ethnic.
We're kind,
We're fair,
we listen,
we care. About building a fairer Oxleas for all. If you'd like to get involved, please visit The Ox.
Jessica, Nikki, Karen, hiya. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving up some of your very, very valuable time to share your experiences of building Fairer Oxleas in this past 12 months. Jessica, Nikki and Karen are part of our action plan group who've been meeting on a voluntary basis across the last year and have been feeding directly into the work we've been doing as part of building Fairer Oxleas. I'd love to hear from you and get an idea of how you have found being on the project and any particular highlights. So should we kick off with Karen, please?
Oh, thanks, Hassan. For me, all of it's a highlight, really. Just getting it off the ground, the involvement of 40 plus wonderful volunteers, which also includes Jessica and Nikki, has really made such a difference. So having staff members from across the trust, from different services and roles involved in the action plan groups really helped us focus on what's important to staff. So that's been a real highlight for me. And I think the other thing I would like to mention is the In Each Other's Shoes film that we did around microaggressions. It was great fun to do in many ways. It took a little while to produce, but I think the finished result is really powerful, and I think it really gets the messages across that we're aiming to do. And that's on the Building Fairer Oxleas page on the Ox, along with some more detailed guidance around microaggressions that people might want to check out. So for me, that was the highlights.
Thank you, Karen. And I know I've been to so many teams who really, really appreciated the In Each Other's Shoes film. I can't take a lot of credit. A lot of that work happened before I joined the team, but it's some fantastic work that's gone on behind the scenes for that. And I know how impactful that has been and how many conversations that has begun across the trust in regards to some of the very difficult topics that this project has touched on so far. Nikki, can I invite you to share your experiences and some of the highlights in the past year for yourself?
Thank you, Hassan. For me, likewise, the microaggression film has been a good eye-opener and good conversation starter for lots of staff. And it's about people being mindful as well, I think, which is really important. Also, the other highlight for me is to see the progression going with the recruitment, making it a fair process for all. Still lots of work to be done, but behind the scenes, a lot of work has been done revamping the policies. So there's a long way to go still, but I'm looking forward to carrying on working. And it's only if our staff tell us what the issues are, we can support them and make Oxleas a fairer place to work. Thank you.
Nikki. Thank you so much. And I really cannot emphasize that point enough, Nikki, that this is a project that is about every member of the Oxleas community. And we really, really encourage all of our colleagues across the trust to please get involved with the project, speak to myself, to Karen, to Nikki, to Jessica, any of the other members you know are involved with the project itself or the action plan group, but also completing things like the survey that we're putting out and feeding back to us when we come out to you to hear your views so that we can build this project in response to the things that concern you, and we can put together a trust that is fairer in the eyes of all of us. Thank you again, Nikki. Jessica, I'd love to hear from you as well and some of your wonderful experiences working with this project.
Hi, thank you, Hassan. It's been great working on the Buffalo group. And when it initially started, I was kind of thinking, oh, will I have time? What will come out of it? But literally being part of the group has been so amazing because we've learned a lot, and I've been in Oxleas for over 10 years, and just being able to put our views across and to be heard and to include everybody. I mean, it's been so wonderful, and the outcome of it is just really great because now we've got how you can breaking the band 7 ceiling, and also just being able to know that there's career upgrading that we can all join in, and we, you know, that's just been so wonderful. Also, the film that you just did was so great because when you came to our team meeting, it just generated a lot of conversation. And for some of us, you just sometimes don't realize you're saying something that's going to offend somebody. So it's really good that we've listened to it. And also, although it's really looking at us as the Black ethnic minority group, you can also just think about it. Maybe something I say is going to offend another person. So it's been great being on the journey. We've got to meet other people. I think for me, what I've taken out of it is I've got to know a lot more different people from Oxleas that I would never have met in my time of being in Oxleas. And I just want to thank the team that's been behind the scenes doing this whole work and encouraging us to get involved.
Thank you, Jessica. And I think that really, again, summarizes in a beautiful way so many of the key aims that the project has. And one of those really fundamental pillars of the project is to build the Oxleas community and to encourage us to get to know one another better, to build those working relationships, to be on good terms with our colleagues. And like you said, this project in itself, and for me personally as well, has been a fantastic way to get to know people I don't think since I joined Oxleas that I've had the opportunity to go out and meet so many different people working in, our clinical teams, working on our admin teams, the teams behind the scenes, as well as the teams on the front line. And it's been fantastic for all of us to really get to know one another. I think we all are very aware that there's a lot to do, and the project has a lot further to go. But I think we, at the same time, should all be very proud of what it's achieved. And I hope everyone can appreciate from the experiences of my three colleagues that the project has achieved a lot in these last 12 months. And there's a lot of really hard work that's gone on. Not all of it may be apparent, but a lot of it behind the scenes that has led us to having some fantastic deliverables already, and a lot of things are now in the pipeline to be delivered very soon. Karen, Jessica, Nikki, thank you again for your time, and thank you for your continued support of the Building Fairer Oxleas project and your continued volunteering of your time towards the project.
Thanks very much to Hassan and colleagues there for that update on the work of the working group. And as they said there's been lots of work going on behind the scenes that will really start to come to fruition over the course of the next 12 months. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Alison Smith, who is supporting the London region with its workforce race strategy. Alison has stepped in kindly at the last minute because Janine LaRosa had to be elsewhere, but she will be joining us tomorrow for our Breaking the Band 7 ceiling conversation. But welcome, Alison. Thank you very much for being here today. So first off, the NHS as a whole in the London region set out a 10-year strategy with a range of goals about transforming the way that we work to support that goal of creating greater equity and equality within the workforce. And there's conversations about some quick wins, things that we can do in the shorter term as we work towards a longer term goal of creating greater fairness within the NHS. And as a chief exec, I've been part of the chief exec action learning sets we've been doing regionally. But do you want to tell us a bit about the strategy and some of those early priorities that we're hoping to land over the course of the next year or two?
Yes, thank you, Matthew, and it's a real pleasure to join you this afternoon. So we compiled a sort of list, if you like, of quick wins, some of which will probably be familiar to many of you, because it sounds to me from listening to your clips just now that you're doing a lot of these things already. So one of the ones I'm involved in specifically is around devising recruitment processes, and I think, to me, and I probably would say that because it's kind of my project, but I think this lies at the heart of a lot of what needs to change. So this is around if you think about each stage of a recruitment process, so you write a job description, you put an advert out, you shortlist, you interview. There's an opportunity for all of that to introduce bias in favour of certain candidates and to the detriment of others. So that's one area that we're focusing on quite intensively at the moment, because I feel that if we start making a difference to processes early on, that will start making a difference to individual experiences. So the other sort of thing we're doing, a lot of this will be familiar to Matthew, because some of this has come down from letters to chief executives, for example, around looking at the makeup of your senior leadership team, looking at the makeup of people who are involved in decision making around emergency procedures, for example. So in the early days of COVID, it became apparent to the senior leadership within NHS England that most of the decision makers at trust level around emergency procedures were all from a white background. Now, it's probably different to you because you will have experienced the pandemic in a different way, being a combined community and mental health trust. But certainly in the acute sector, where I spend most of my week, that was actually very true. So actions were put in place to try and address that, to bring forward people with the right skill set who may be from a different background, but not actually in a post. I think one of the problems, Matthew, is that we put a post in charge of something which then is filled by a person. But when you have an emergency, you've got people with so many skills that are in all different places in your organisation. The key for the organisation is to free up those people to be available to make decisions based on their skills. rather than the fact that they happen to be sitting in that post. So a lot of the early stuff really was around conversations. It was around checking decision making, and I think that's probably the sort of thing that will have come through at your Chief Executive Action Learning set. You know, who do I go to get advice about this? Who are the right people to talk to?
Yeah, and I'm really struck by what you're saying about creating diversity of experience in conversations. I mean, we're fortunate within the trust in that, you know, I mean, our Deputy Chief Exec, Dr. Ifia Kocha, he was very much running the trust during the early days of the pandemic when I was seconded elsewhere as well. And what was really interesting, watching all the WhatsApp groups and all the discussions that were going on, there were voices saying we need to think as London about the diversity of our population more, but those voices were few. And initially, we're saying something I think that perhaps the broader group didn't really necessarily want to hear, because it was about race and it was about discrimination. It was about all those things that we find difficult to talk to. So it was easier for all the middle-aged white men to talk to each other about what they'd like to do. And I think what was interesting was that voices that started off being quite lone voices about saying we need to think about this as a region started to gain more and more strength and volume, until now one of the dominant conversation quite frequently now when the London Chief Exec Group meets, it's about the impact on our population, recognising that diversity of population. Yeah. And it's hearing from strong black leaders like Kevin Fenton, our other ethnic minority leaders who've played a huge leadership role, but it took time for us to get there, didn't it, Alison?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I have the greatest respect for people like Kevin Fenton, because Kevin has a reputation for making life a little bit uncomfortable for people, but from a position of great knowledge. So I had the pleasure of sitting on working groups with Kevin long before the pandemic, where he would actually sort of say, well, what impact's this going to have on your African community, or what impact will this have on your Somali community? And I think it's really important to open people's eyes to the fact that you know, whatever you're doing as an organisation can impact. It doesn't necessarily have to be this way, but it can impact some people detrimentally for a reason that you've never even thought of. So it's important to keep questioning everything, isn't it? I think that's the issue for me.
And we're still seeing that. You know, I think there's a article I was reading today in the Guardian about vaccine uptakes in older black people still being much lower levels than among other elements of the population. You know, that sort of discrimination that was baked in at the start of the pandemic, it's still having its impact now, isn't it?
It is, but I think it's quite difficult because from conversations I have with colleagues who are from black backgrounds, they'll say, you know, the more they keep going on about it, the more people feel that they're somehow not being listened to, that actually, you know, they have put forward concerns, and rather than giving terms like vaccine hesitancy out to people, saying, oh, you know, the reason they don't want to have a vaccine is X, Y, and Z, actually just listen to them. And if somebody decides not to have a vaccine, I'm afraid, you know, you have to respect that decision for whatever reason. And I was involved in the vaccination campaign at Kingston Hospital where I work, and some of the suspicions around the vaccination, particularly from black African colleagues, was very, very understandable. Some of it went back to experiences in their countries, such as Nigeria, where there had been difficulties with the Pfizer company, and equally there is a level of mistrust. So I think, I mean, I don't want to get into too deep a conversation about the psychological contract, but one of the things we've been thinking about over the last few years, and the work I've been doing with King's College London on race equality, is that actually if we say to our black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, this is a good thing, and all they ever feel is that we've never done them a good thing before, why do they suddenly start believing that that's going to be the right thing? So, you know, there's a lot of nuances in the conversation that I think perhaps people don't understand in their anxiety and ambition to get as many people vaccinated as possible, for all the right reasons, obviously, but it can be more complex than people think.
And we've talked a lot about race, haven't we? And you know, that lots of this started with Black Lives Matter, and it started with what happened to George Floyd. And I've had contact from, we've got Chinese staff and others who've said, actually, I know some of our Chinese colleagues experiencing pretty awful discrimination in the early days of this. And then recently we've had Indian colleagues who've raised concerns. I'm pleased to see we're now working on the Greek alphabet and talking about the Delta variant rather than the Indian variant. So we've talked a lot about race. But there's other forms of exclusion, isn't there? There's other forms of inequality that affect people's experiences of working and receiving healthcare. What does the strategy have to say about that?
Well, the strategy is large. Well, it's called a race equality strategy. So let's not pretend it's going to solve all the other issues that might come up. However, my mantra is always that whatever you do to improve good practice, make it inclusive and improve processes will be to everyone's benefit. So I think that's and I've had similar situations with people that say, but what about our needs? And I think what we're saying is that the race issue came to the fore, not just because of Black Lives Matter, but also because of factual evidence that colleagues were losing their lives and becoming ill, and their race was a factor in the outcome of their illness. And I think we couldn't stand by and ignore that. But I do feel whenever good practice is improved, which is why I think the banner of building a Fairer Oxleas is much, much better, because actually that's for everyone. No one can say, oh, I don't want a Fairer Oxleas. It's inclusive.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a shadow executive team now who've been brilliant. 12 members of staff who now get involved in exec level discussions, get full access to the executive team papers and discuss this kind of thing with us. And we met this morning and they were looking at our trust mortality indicators and looking at the number of people with LDE who've been affected by the pandemic as well. Yeah. And I think the advantage of this is we're thinking about that entire agenda. It is about race, but it's also about experience of mental illness. It's about experience of living with learning difficulties, etc. So I think you're right. The actions that we take to create a fairer trust will benefit everyone. I'm interested. I'm conscious, Alison, that it's me and you talking to each other. We're both white. We're both, at a certain stage in our careers with a certain set of experiences, and I appreciate that wouldn't have been the case. But thank you for dropping in at last minute. But what can people like us, what can we do as white allies to support our colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds?
So the way I have a sort of couple of things that I like to have as my core values, and one of which is I don't speak for people, because I think that's bordering on patronising, but I will listen to what people say, and if I'm in an arena where I can repeat those messages to everyone's benefit, then that's what I will do. So we're calling it allyship, and we are running as part of the London Workforce Strategy. We're actually doing what we are calling a White Allies programme, which is basically around raising awareness, talking about when as a white person you need to be quiet and when you need to speak up. And I think the COVID experiences are a classic example of this, because actually in a lot of places white allies have had to speak up on behalf of people who are disempowered. So one of the most moving things ever, I found it deeply upsetting, was when I joined a call of nurses, a teleconference run by Jane Clegg and her team in London, to hear African nurses from southeast London, not from Oxleas, I hasten to add, but from acute hospitals, saying colleagues are hiding PPE from us because they're worried that there isn't enough to go round. Now, as a white ally, as a white nurse, if you know that's happening, you have to tell someone about that, because that is very, very wrong. So I think it's kind of it's calling things out when you know that they are wrong, but it's also listening to me. If someone wants you to help them, say it in their own words, then help them, but don't don't disempower them, I suppose, by speaking on their behalf if that's not if that's not what they want. Sorry, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but no, I hope you get what I mean.
I do. I think in the letter I wrote last year, we talked about the role of white colleagues in amplifying the voices of some of our ethnic minority colleagues, because sometimes we can help take those stories forward in a way and use some of that privilege and advantage we've got to try to make sure those voices are heard. And just the last question for you, Alison, do you think at the end of the last 12 15 months or so that we've been through. Do you feel more optimistic about what the NHS will be like as a place for people from ethnic minorities to work in the future? Do you feel as though we are making the right kind of progress now?
I think we're making progress. My challenge to all of us, Matthew, is to not make it a sort of one-hit wonder. So let's make sure it's part of our work going forward, because it would be very easy to take a point in time and react to it with a lot of action and a lot of goodwill and a lot of great effort, and then let it slide. So I'm very optimistic, but I think people like yourself and myself, who can be allies, need to keep it high on the agenda. And I love what you're doing with your shadow executive. I think that's a fantastic way of making sure that you don't become complacent or you don't veer off course, because to me it's a long game. We've got a 10-year race strategy, so we're not going to solve it all overnight, but we need to pace ourselves to keep going.
I'd agree very much with that. Thank you very much for joining us today, Alison. It's been great to hear about this, and as I said, Janine, who is hoping to be with us today, will be joining colleagues tomorrow to speak about her experiences of breaking through the Band 7 ceiling as well. So we'll get that opportunity to hear from her. So our next item up now, it's to hear from our own fantastic BAME X network, Juliana and colleagues Laura and Hassan, to tell us a bit more about what the network's been doing over the last 12 months. They've always been a fantastic asset to the Trust. From the moment I joined, the conversations with the network about what we can do to be a better place to work for that really significant and important part of our workforce that come from an ethnic minority background. So we'll hand over now to Juliana and Laura and Hassan to hear a bit more about their experience the last year.
Hi, Juliana and Laura. Thank you so much for giving up your precious time this afternoon to join me and have this conversation. Juliana is the chair of our BAMEX network, and she's also the South London Partnership Forensic Equalities Lead. And Laura is the vice chair of the network, and she's also senior clinical coder in our quality and governance team. Again, thank you both for joining us. I hope you're having a wonderful day. What I wanted to do today was talk to you about your roles with the BAMEX network, but also talk to you about your wider involvement with building Fairer Oxleas and the many roles you've held within inequalities over the years.
Okay.
Juliana, please, if you
I'll start.
Yeah.
As the chair, I have the right to start first. Okay, so yes, that is my title, but people who know me know that I have been in the Trust for a few years now and have held very different posts in different places. But the one passion people know I have is equality and equity, especially for people from minority communities. And my involvement with the network goes back a good 10 years. And during that time, we've been involved in various things in the network. But I have to say that the last year has been probably the most significant in terms of change, and for people to be able to be dealing with race and equality, race equality, in a very different way. And it's been exciting. I'm tired, but it's very exciting.
Thanks, Julia. I'm glad to hear that, and it fits quite well, obviously, because we're here to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the project. And you're so right that in the last year, a lot of conversations that have been taking place for a long time, but have been kind of maybe a little bit behind the scenes and a bit hush-hush have come out into the open, and what's really needed to happen, and that conversation that really needed to take place across society is finally taking place. Laura, I'd welcome you as well to share your
Thank you
thoughts.
so much, Hassan. So I've been in Oxleas for 17 years, and I have always been based at Pinewood House. And I have seen changes in Pinewood. Equally, I have seen behaviours that I would say that is not equitable. And at the time, I think I was not in the right space. I didn't feel empowered enough to step up and say something to some of the behaviours that I used to see going on. Anyway, when I started to grow in confidence, I realised that I needed to support some of our staff members who were I would call, they didn't have a voice. I wasn't even part of the network at the time, but I felt that unfairness that was going on in the trust, somebody needed to take a stand. So I just started to support people. And then I knew of the network, but it wasn't something that I was I didn't feel that I had the authority to go and join the network. But anyway, I joined the network just as a member. And then I realized that there was so much work needed. And I became just an exec. Juliana badged me to become an exec. And there was just no going back, because I realized that all the things that I had been passionate about and I had witnessed, it was happening not just in Pinewood, but all over. So there was a need for voices to be heard. And I then decided to step forward and become the vice chair. And I must say that being the vice chair has allowed me to speak up with a greater voice. And I feel empowered to support our staff members who we've always said, we are the voice for the voiceless. And, when all the things that's happening now in BAFO, as we speak, you will know that we have been highlighting them for so long, and they were not even taking any notice. Everybody, it was almost like we raised them, nothing was done. We were tired, weren't we, Juliana?
We're very tired.
Very tired. We were very tired.
But what was really helpful, I think there was a series of things that happened. So we had the George Floyd moment, and then we had the pandemic building to a crescendo like we could never have thought of. And all of the inequalities that were highlighted as a result of what was going on around COVID. BAFO seemed the next natural thing. So where we had created the space that staff could tell us their stories, now the trust wanted to hear the stories. And we were able to facilitate that, let's give them the stories of people really were experiencing it. And what was really good was when the Building a Fairer Oxleas, we keep calling it BAFO, we shouldn't do that. People don't know what BAFO means. When the opportunity came for people to actually come and tell their stories to senior staff, I genuinely didn't believe that people would do it. I thought there's no way people are going to come forward and tell their stories. But actually, people took the opportunity because they sensed the difference. They sensed there was a change and that their stories were going to be heard and that people were going to do something about it. And I think that's the success. We may not have got very much done yet, but for me, the major success of the Building a Fairer Oxleas was there were people who I had been supporting and had known about for a long time who would never have become public. They would never have stood up in a room and said, this is what I've experienced. This is how awful it is for me. But Building a Fairer Oxleas allowed them to do it. I was really impressed by that.
Thanks, Juliana. I think it's wonderful to hear that change is palpable and people have felt comfortable to come forward. And I completely agree with you. I mean, when I had this similar conversation with our Building a Fairer Oxleas volunteers, I highlighted to them that we do need to be proud of what we've achieved. Yes, we haven't delivered many products. We've had the film and a few other elements, and there's a lot in the pipelines on its way. But one thing I think we have delivered is the opportunity for people to have a space where they can have some really difficult conversations and know that those conversations are being heard. And I think you're both spot on. It took really, really unfortunate circumstances for this work to begin. But the reassuring thing I can say is someone who's very, very much involved with the project as a project manager is that the trust is genuinely investing a lot of time and effort into understanding the issues and actually responding to them. And the work has very much been focused on meaningful change and not just providing a kind of like a a PR campaign or anything of that sort. Before we end, can I ask both of you, if people want to become involved with the BAMEX network, how can they do that? And also, who is the BAMEX network open to? Is it open to only Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff? Can white members of staff join?
Yeah, the network is open to anyone that wants to join it. We have associate members for people who may not fit any particular minority group, but ours is our network is one that accepts that there are people who are white who are in minority groups. So we have Irish members, we have Italian members, we have people from all over the world who are involved in our network. The network is open. We have a network page. You can go on the page and you'll find how to join us. But what I want to say to people about joining the network is that sometimes I think people think if you join a network, it's because things have gone wrong or you're not happy or, I don't know what that network does, but I don't know if I want to be associated with it. This is a network of people who care about people. And the only reason we exist is because there was a level of unfairness that had been leveled at us as a group that wasn't being addressed. The more people who join the network, the stronger our voice is. The stronger our voice, the more likely we are to be heard. So I would welcome every and anyone who wants to join to come along and join us. And, we would be happy to see people.
Julia, I think those are beautiful words for us to draw this conversation to a close on. Laura, both of you, thank you so much for giving up your time, and thank you for the work you do. I think the BAMEX network is really lucky to have both of you chairing it, and your passion for this work is so palpable. Thanks both.
Thank you. Sam. Have a lovely day.
Have a lovely day.
Great as ever to hear from Juliana and Laura there with Hassan. So our next item is on diversity space, and this is a network that was set up for colleagues in forensics in prisons. We have, as a trust now, around I think it's close to 800 staff who work in prison settings, in addition to the hundreds of colleagues who work in forensics at the Bracton Centre, in the Bracton Memorial, and elsewhere across the trust, supporting people with those lifelong care needs. And one thing that always really strikes me is the contrast between the fact that in forensics we have relative control over the environment because it's an Oxley service, and yet when you see our colleagues in prisons, they're very much working within an environment where the tone and the culture is dominated by that of the prison and the prison service. And having spent a number of days in our prisons, I'm looking forward to visiting Swaleside later this week actually, to catch up with colleagues there. Some of that dominant culture in those prisons is not within our control, and as a result some of the staff there suffer some of the very worst abuse, I think, that any of our staff do. We do encounter abuse in many of our settings, and we're trying increasingly to get that message out there that it shouldn't be acceptable. But I do know, having spent some time with a number of our staff there, that the level and the viciousness and unpleasantness, the abuse that some of our colleagues in prisons in particular do face, but also within forensics, is not acceptable. And as a result, diversity space was set up to allow colleagues in those services to support each other, and then its reach was broadened out across the organisation, and it predated the pandemic. But I think certainly in the last year and a half or so, it's really come into its own as an opportunity for colleagues there to speak to each other, to discuss ideas, to share their experiences and find support in some really quite tough circumstances. So I'm now going to hand over to Hassan, who's been speaking to Kemi and Taf from Forensics in Prisons about diversity space and what it means to them.
Hi Kemi, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Kemi is one of our wonderful HR managers, and she's part of a wonderful work stream we have in Oxley's called the Diversity Space. And we've invited Kemi along this afternoon to tell us more about Diversity Space and more about the journey she's been on around diversity and inclusion. Kemi, over to you.
First of all, thank you, Hassan, for having me here today. I'm one of 3 co-founders of Diversity Space. Unfortunately, they're not here today, annual leave and all of that, so I'm representing them. So very briefly, Diversity Space was launched in October 2019, and it was set up by members of forensics and prisons staff who were experiencing adversities in the workplace. And this adversity, unfortunately, was because of the color of their skin. So the diversity space was created as a safe place, a supportive, safe place for them to share their experience and build resilience. So that space was born in, as I said, in 2019, and but since then we've been trying to expand this space, not just for prisons and forensic staff members, but for members of staff across the trust to come in and share some of their experiences with us, and also gain again from some of the experiences that others have gone through and find how they've been able to cope. So that's where we are right this minute.
And that's where Kemi fits in so well with the work we're doing with building the Fairer Oxleas, because you've almost piloted a lot of our initiatives in a smaller working space in the prisons and forensics directorate, and now we're looking, like you say, together to build on a lot of those things across the wider trust. So Kemi, with that in mind, what's your experiences been of working with the Building the Fairer Oxleas project and the things we're trying to achieve?
First of all, in terms of all these staff members that we've spoken with, they've had nothing but positive feedback to give us in terms of this initiative that we've got, Building Fairer Oxley. Some of the things that we heard from them is around recruitment, the positive work in terms of looking at how we recruit, particularly around the panel members, recruitment panel members. That excites a lot of people. They think we're on the right track with that.
Thank you. No, that's wonderful. And I mean, I had the pleasure of visiting two of our prisons over the last few weeks, Elmsley and Swellside. And like you say, the teams there have really embraced a lot of the initiative that we're putting out with Building the Fairer Oxleas. And we had some wonderfully open and vulnerable conversations on some very difficult topics. So it is great to see. And you know, we do hope to continue involving all of our colleagues in the Forensics and Prisons Directorate as much as possible in all this work we do. If people have concerns or want to get involved with diversity space, are they able to contact you, or is there anyone else that they can reach out to?
Definitely, they can contact myself. They can contact Corey or Taff. Also, we are on the internet. It's under the network page, so we're right there. Diversity space, we're right there. So yeah, they can just. People know who I am, I'm sure. Send me an email.
Brilliant. Kemi, thank you so much for your time today. And also thank you for all the work you've been doing and are doing since October 2019. We wish you every luck, and we are really, really happy and honoured to be working with the team at Diversity Space. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for including prisons and forensics. I think for many, many years, staff that work within prison in particular, I've always felt being neglected. I think for the first time, they are being heard, they are being seen. So it's such a wonderful experience, exposure as well for them, to bring them to be part of Oxley, something that they've always said they weren't really a part of. So this is really wonderful. And thank you for coming around as well, as I said, to see us.
Thank you, Kemi.
You're welcome.
Hi, Taff. Thanks for joining us. Taff is one of our specialist practitioners, and he's also one of the co-founders of a great initiative called Diversity Space. And what I wanted to hear from you, Taff, today about is some of the experiences you've had and some of the work you've been involved in that's led you to being a co-founder of Diversity Space.
Thank you, Hassan, for having me, and I really appreciate your time today. To be honest with you, Diversity Space started because of some of the experiences that I was experiencing and some of my colleagues from a BAME background in the Kent prisons, to be honest with you. One of the things that I was experiencing is a lot of microaggression. Around that time, I was in a senior position, managing a team, and the microaggression that I was experiencing was actually affecting my own mental health. And some of my colleagues that were working in similar positions within Swellside, we sort of started meeting together and saying, you know what, this doesn't seem right. This is Oxleas, we are better than this. What is going on? So we just decided to start meeting up. The original members are Parveen and Michael, who've now left the trust because of some of the experiences that they were experiencing. We just decided, listen, enough is enough. When we created Diversity Space, was initially for us to just sit down and to reflect on the experiences that we've been, or the things that were affecting us. After a while, we said, you know what, we need to do something about this. If I'm feeling like this, you are feeling like that, this should not happen. This should not continue. So we reached out to Juliana from the BAME network, and then we also reached out to Karen Edmonds. They both came to Swellside. We had discussions, and they were very appalled to the experiences that we were experiencing as members of Oxleas. And from there on, Karen invited us to one of the business meetings where we met Rachel Claire Evans, and we kind of presented what we were experiencing through one of those meetings. And things just snowballed from there on. We actually ended up having really good allies in Karen and Rachel Claire Evans. They really were supportive. I think sometimes when you meet people, they tell you what you want to hear. But what was different with them is the action that came from that. From there on, we're going to board meetings to try to change, to make a difference. And I think this is where Building Fairer Oxleas started coming into play, and we were linked into that. So I really appreciate the support that I've been given by those people I've mentioned. They're absolutely powerful allies to have.
They are, and I think a lot of people who are involved with building the Fairer Oxleas, they can echo those comments, especially Karen and Rachel are both great allies to this cause and have both really invested a lot of time and effort and are very passionate about making sure that we actually do achieve a real change. And I think your comment there about it being a genuine change and not just hearing what we want to hear is so spot on. And it is to date, and I hope it continues to be the approach that Oxleas is taking right from the top with Matthew, and how clearly Matthew, stated his opinions last year when he wrote his letter. He's got the follow-up letter coming out this week as well. And no one has shied away from this topic, which is fantastic to see. It's a very difficult topic. I don't think no one can deny that. And there's a lot of baggage and a lot of potential awkwardness because of the nature of the discussion. But the fact we're able to have it and the fact we're getting to a point where we can enter into some very vulnerable discussion is fantastic. You've mentioned microaggressions, and just in closing, I wanted to ask, have you seen the In Each Other's Shoes film that we've produced around microaggressions?
I have seen that video, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I think the fact that you're actually going to coming to Swellside, meeting some of the teams that I've experienced those issues with, and talking about those issues. To be honest with you, I just give credit to Building Fairer Oxleas to how far we have come and where we are going. It's a stepping stone. Don't get me wrong, we are so far away to being where we need to be. But the fact that I'm actually seeing yourself in the prisons doing that work, it just brings joy to me. We're headed in the right direction.
Thanks, Taff. And it was an eye-opener for me. I think sometimes our prison and forensics directorate can feel a little bit left out. So to actually go out there to see some of the work that's going on and to see some of the isolation because of the rules around technology, phones, internet, etc. It was fantastic to sit down with the teams in Swellside and Elmsley. And I think there's plans in place for me to go out to a few of our other prisons. And the fantastic thing there is that a lot of it is coming from the teams. They are inviting me. I'm not kind of forcing myself on them. So you can see there is that hunger to have this discussion and to try and begin to make those changes. But Taff, thank you so much. I think you are a great asset to this project. You've been providing us with a great insight in some of the work you've done. I know I've already suggested it to you, but I'm hoping we can do a lot more work together and a lot more communications work together around some of the great work Diversity Space is doing. So I urge all our viewers to look out for that. And again, Taff, thank you so much for giving up your time today.
Thank you very much.
And I'm looking forward to catching up with Taff at Swaleside on Wednesday. So any colleagues from Sheppey cluster, do look out for me out and about on your sites. So that was good to hear. And as I said, our staff in prisons in particular do put up with a lot of abuse that we don't have the same control over that we perhaps do in some of our other services, and I'm glad that they've been able to bring that initiative that they've done support each other to the wider trust too. So there's been a lot for us to hear about. Before we finish today, Rachel, Claire Evans and Hassan will be back just to say some things about next steps. But in closing, I wanted to reiterate the commitment of the executive and the board of Oxleas to building a fairer Oxleas, to the things that I said in the letter last year, which was sent on behalf of the board and the exec. And our chairman Andy Troster and I discuss this regularly. This is not something that was a flash in the pan moment for people like me to take a sort of cheap hit at saying, we must change this and then let's move on and forget about it. That absolutely isn't acceptable in this space. I think as a trust, I hope you can see that we are putting in the work and the foundations of how we recruit people, how we support development, how we provide cultural intelligence training to managers and leaders within the organisation to get them to look differently at the way things do. The selections we make when we're looking to appoint people to more senior roles to encourage a wealth of talent to come through. Things like setting up the shadow executive to expose the thinking of the exec to very different mindsets and experiences and influence and improve the way that we work. I think we've taken some significant steps in the last year. This has been a problem for many of you, and a problem many of us have been complicit in for all of our lives. And I'm not here today to say that this is a simple thing for us to fix, and with a few little adjustments here and there, we'll be in a much better place. But what we can do is, I think, look at 12 months worth of achievements and say these are things that we can be satisfied with as a starting point, as a sign of commitment, and as our commitment to you, from the board and exec to you, to our staff, that we really mean this when we say we want Oxleas to be a place that is a great place to work and that values all of our staff and allows you to bring all that experience you've got of life, of work to the fore, and expect to be treated with dignity and respect and supported to develop within your careers. I wrote to you all on the 8th of June 2020 saying that we wanted to do something significant about this, and I'll be writing to all of you again tomorrow, 8th of June 2021, with some follow-up information and to say a bit more about what we need to do over the next year or so. And I want to close today by thanking all of you who've had that time and that courage and that commitment to come forward and speak about this and support us in building the Fairer Oxleas. I'll now hand over to Rachel, Claire and Hassan, who've been as I said, two real powerhouses in making this work as allies and leaders within the organisation. Thank you all for your time today, and Rachel and Hassan can take us to the close now. Thank you.
Hi Hassan, we've been hearing a lot at the moment about the things that we've done over the last year about building a fairer Oxleas, but just want to spend a bit of time now looking forward. What do you think we should be focusing on for the next year?
Hi Rachel, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to everyone today. I think that there's a lot of great work that's happened in the last year, and it's a brilliant foundation for us to build on going forward, but it is just that it is a foundation, and there certainly is a lot for us to do. And I've had a wonderful opportunity to meet a number of teams and hear from them what they think we should be focusing on. One element for me is offering more in the way of tools and active things for teams to be able to partake in, to build some of the conversation starters we've introduced, especially with things like the In Each Other's Shoes film. And alongside that, equally, I'd be looking forward also to what other elements of the protected characteristics we can bring into scope with the project, especially looking at disability, an area close to my heart and an area, again, that a number of our team members that I've been out to across the trust have highlighted to me. How about yourself, Rachel?
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think having some of these conversations really isn't easy. And I think the more that we can equip ourselves and managers to start these conversations, I think the better. And I also agree with you about the focus, because we've had such an intensive focus over the last year about what we can be doing in terms of improving our cultural intelligence and our recruitment and progression processes with a particular angle on race. And we've got so much more to do in that space. But I think it's the time now is also for us to be expanding and looking at other areas as well. When you went out and visited those teams, did you sense that sense of discomfort sometimes about talking about these issues? Did that come through?
I did, and Rachel, what was really surprising and for me heartwarming was how aware my colleagues were of that discomfort. and to a degree how accepting they were, because it is an uncomfortable topic. It is something that is going to challenge a lot of people to come out of their comfort zones, and it's great to see colleagues ready to embrace that and ready to show vulnerability. There is certainly more we can do, and there's certainly more, I think, as a project that we can look at to offer people the skills to be able to broach these topics. But it's there for sure. I do think the events of the last 12 months, though, have moved us a long way forward from where we were sort of pre-2020, and how it was equally uncomfortable, but the issue then really was it wasn't even discussed, regardless of how challenging the topic may have been.
And I've been really sensing from people recently a real appetite from our white staff to be playing a bigger role in relation to this agenda. And we're going to be having some conversations over the next month, I know, to try and think about the role that we can all play in trying to build a fairer Oxleas, and to recognise that this isn't the job of our Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff to be in the driving seat. It's for all of us to be creating that culture. Probably in terms of the area I worry about the most is about disciplinaries. So we've tried really hard with our Just Culture approach to try and make sure that we have a really balanced approach towards disciplinaries and try and avoid them wherever possible, really. But we have seen that we have unfortunately not been able to maintain that progress around making sure that we don't have a disproportionate number of Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff in our disciplinaries. And that's going to be a really big priority for me and my teams over the coming year to try and fix things. But you mentioned about kind of broadening the scope a little bit and looking at disability and other range of protected characters. How do you think we should go about doing that and getting those views to inform the year that's coming?
Sure. So I think we've learned some great lessons from the work we've done with race, in that the first port of call for me always will be is to go out to people who are from the group in question that we're looking at. So I'd look to hold as many open spaces for colleagues with disabilities, colleagues who may be carers, who have first-hand or second-hand experience of disability, and hear from them what their concerns are, specifically around the workplace and around what Oxleas can be doing better when it comes to disability. But that would always be my first port of call. Alongside that, Rachel, we are launching the Pulse survey in the next few days, and we'll be asking people to respond to that as well. There are going to be questions in there on disability as well as race and some of the other protected characteristics. And that's also going to be a great barometer for us to be able to mark where we currently are. And when we come back to carry out a follow-up survey, how far we've moved. And I hope that very far, but how far we have moved in the months that would have passed between the two surveys. So those are two really key areas. And that's something that I really need our colleagues to support us with and to take out. I think it will take 2 or 3 minutes maximum to at least do the latter of those two, which is the survey, which will be a really, really key metric for myself and then you and the team to be able to really get a handle on what the concerns of the trust are and where our colleagues feel we currently are.
Thank you. Yes, a real plea to people, I think, to complete that survey. Hopefully you've seen that the exercise of speaking up and telling us about what needs to change does start to make a difference in the organisation, and that things can change when we really put our minds to it. So we're going to be out there visiting networks, visiting teams, gathering your thoughts through the survey, and hopefully we can agree some priorities for the next year that will really make a difference in terms of building a fairer Oxleas. Hassan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.